Hey everybody, welcome back. Okay, this is our second last video. I'll be giving you another one on Friday, which is the day our final assignment is due. I have gotten some feedback already. Remember, that's really important because there's not going to be a rewrite on this story. This is going to require some planning ahead. And Danielle Delp is the person is a right to get that alternative opinion to the remarks about the housing. So I would suggest that you at least show me something, maybe at least a top. In other words, the top of the story, maybe a lead. You gather some idea at least of like where the story is going, how the people feel in general. They have like mixed opinions. Do they have like varied opinions? What sort of direction is the story going to go into? And that's dictated by what's in the lead. Um, so yeah, so that's something I'd like to see pretty soon, okay? Because you don't have a lot of time to do this, so we don't have a lot of time to do anything really. So um so anyway, so that's the deal. Um so let's try to get like some feedback because again, there's no reread on this. I really want to make sure that like everybody reaches out to Danielle Delp. She's volunteering to do this like Bill did. I really don't want to see at the last minute because Danielle, I know, I believe, will be honest and basically telling me that she responded to everybody she needed to respond to. So I really don't want to hear on Thursday or Friday, whatever, that Danielle didn't get back to me because I'll probably go to Danielle and probably maybe learn the opposite. I don't know. We'll see. Um, so anyway, you need to reach out to her, okay? And get the response. And like I said, the response actually goes toward the bottom of the story. So let's actually like again, I may have gone over this a little bit already. I did go over this a little bit already, but anyway, again, it's about your story is going to be again about the theme essentially the lead, and that is student reaction housing from what I provided you. Okay, and then it's basically transition, anecdote, maybe a quote, and a transition, maybe two anecdotes and a quote. Okay, and it goes on and on. And toward the bottom of the story, you have a transition, and you have essentially like Danielle Delp's remarks. And the transition essentially is this, and it kind of helps guide the reader through. And that is it's Rutgers University, something along the lines of responded to the students' remarks, saying you kind of again act as the tour guide. You shift the reader through from point to point. That's important. And what this does again is provide balance. Okay. And then you have at the last, you end the story with Danielle Delp. And I know she doesn't have anything to do with housing, but whatever. We have a Rutgers person. So, and then with her title said or released a statement or something like that. Okay. Um, all right. So there is a section in the book. We've been long done went away even from reading about reading in the book, but in chapter two, going way back to chapter two, which is about a month ago now, they do address this idea of balance in story. And I have to be really kind of careful with this, and that is that there's this kind of epidemic in journalism, and it really wasn't an issue until I gotta say, until Trump came into office. Now I'm not necessarily trying to take a side here, but I don't know, whatever you take it, whatever you want. And that is you have people who essentially um you have people who essentially you know who are in positions of power now who are supposed to act as like the authority on certain subjects. And we could usually in the past, even back in the Nixon days, we could actually like and he lied like crazy, but we could actually like take their opinion as like kind of the voice to provide balance to whatever complaints people may be having, that sort of thing. Well, we're getting a lot now, and I don't care what side you're on. We're getting a lot of lies, and I'm not necessarily pointing necessarily directly at Trump, although I could, but we're getting a lot of lies from people like the CDC and things like that. I believe you may have any kind of feelings you feel about the vaccine, but there's a lot of stuff that's coming out from like different health agencies. It's just flat out lies. So it's like it's almost like you have to get like a third opinion now with the certain stories that involve the Trump administration to try to balance things out. So, um, so they call that both sideserism, where you see actually like news organizations almost kind of giving people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary, credibility when nothing he bases anything is on science. Anyway, so there is that, but for our purposes and everything, we just want to really kind of look at everything basic. So we don't want to worry about the Trump administration at this point at our level in our class. We want to worry about just maybe like what's going on essentially at Rutgers University and housing and that sort of thing. And so typically what you would do is you would get maybe like, and this is how stories happen a lot, is they have like some sort of groundswell of people who have comments or complaints about a certain thing, like housing or something. Um, I'm sorry, just hold on a second. Um, if you could just hold on 1 second, please. Um, trying to find the pause button on this thing. Okay, I can't seem to find it. I have actually kind of an important call coming in. I can't find it. Anyway, I can't find it. Sorry about this. I have a friend who's actually in very bad shape, and we're actually trying to dealing with his care right now. Can't find the pause button. All right. So anyway, um, all right, so yeah, so what we have, let's just go back to that should be a keeper. All right, so anyway, if you could just give me 1 more second here. I don't know why there's not like, oh, I'm sorry, it's right here, I think. Ugh, okay, well, maybe not. Okay. All right, so all right, so let's just go back to the share the screen. Um So anyway, it says news stories are not opinion pieces or editorials. News stories must be objective in the sense. So this is actually going toward objectivity. That they report actions, words, or situations without commenting on them. Journalists gather information and report it as accurately as possible. So this goes to the accuracy paradigm that I presented to you. Accuracy, clarity, and focus are three more essential things. If an issue is controversial, you interview representatives of all groups affected and include as many views as possible. So it's maybe not necessarily just like two views, but three views. Just try to balance things out. And that's how you get to the most obtainable version of the truth. Because maybe what a lot of the students have to say, it may be not necessarily grounded in the most basic fact or what I have to say, or maybe it's just complaints they have, but there's an answer or solution, or maybe they're even fixing things. So there's actually that may be like related to what the students are talking about. So you want to get the fullest story possible. Okay. Some sources may make mistakes and some may lie. Journalists may point out inconsistencies or inaccuracies in sources' statements, but they should not call people liars. What you do is you basically try to present several points of view. Okay. Um, all right. So anyway, so that's essentially where we deal with that issue, okay? All right, so that's what we're gunning for here is like some sort of story. Again, it's twice as long as the typical story we've been doing, okay? And like I said, it should be more involved, more in depth. One thing I want to see a little bit better on, I felt like we were doing a great job on like anecdotes and our stories and that sort of thing and presenting them whether in paraphrased way, of using your own words and your writing. But I did see, like when I was going through the feature writing stories, there were many good ones. It was good work overall, but I felt like there was a little bit too much of relying on long quotes. Okay, like um, I stood in. the kitchen and the oven was hot and I was sweating like crazy. That is actually something that should be better worked as a in your own words, okay? Because when you read it like that, it kind of meanders and that sort of thing. How about she stood in the kitchen, and then you can also use pyramids and almost to bring dramas. The oven was hot. And then maybe the word crazy shows a little emotion or color. So she was sweating like crazy. See, there's kind of like almost like halting drama to that. That's how we should be writing these stories, okay? And that's how we should basically like presenting the kind of depth that we're getting, which we got a lot of. We got a lot of really good stories from people, and I appreciate that. So class participation for you guys in these anecdotes. One of my favorite ones, actually, I gotta say, was from Samantha. And I felt like a lot of people were kind of like they would kind of like talk a little bit, or they would just rely a little bit too heavily on a quote from direct quote from here. But this is actually ripe for just like good writing. You take what the information she has here. She has good specific examples in here, and you write them in your own words. Okay. So as I was demonstrating in one of the prior videos, okay. Oh, okay. Typically, this time of year excites me because the weather has been so chaotic and unpredictable. Okay, so I'm sorry, Samantha. I have to remember your last name. Cass. Am I going to spell that wrong? But anyway, Samantha Castellini. I'm sorry, Samantha. Firing on all cylinders here, Castellani. Said this time of year excites her, but the weather has been chaotic and so see how I'm cutting words here. All right. So that's maybe like a good way to kind of like head into this anecdote here, kind of lead into this anecdote. Okay. So you get right to the meat of it. She has been working 40 hours a week at her at an Italian restaurant, okay, and pizzeria. This entails standing for hours at a time near a 600-degree oven with little ventilation or air conditioning, she said. This is really good description, okay? But it's read better and it's written better when it's in your own words. The frequent 90-degree cloudless sky days made the shifts unbearable. I mean, you could say cloudless, but 90-degree days, you could say like with nothing but sun have been unbearable. Her car's air conditioning is broken, making any trip unbearable. We always use that word intolerable, so we can use a different word to actually like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? So basically, that's like some really good detail right there. And here it is. She's like, we can almost like feel the sweat coming off of her when we see this 40 hours of work, 600-degree oven, 90-degree days, nothing but sun. Okay. That's how you do it. And you notice how like we went from that sizable amount of like copy to this much more readable, much more direct. Okay. I saw a lot of like I said, kind of meandering quotes and that sort of thing. Just really like write it with your own. Say I put a period in there, it kind of like halts it, kind of brings it to a pause. It's much easier to read when you bring it to a pause, that sort of thing. Okay. Hi everybody. I'm actually kind of recording this video a bit. And I had to re-edit it a little bit because I felt like I left out some important lessons for this final assignment. We also had two chapters we did read, which dealt with essentially the legal aspects of journalism and what can be reported, what can't be. And I know I talked to you guys about on the record and off the record sourcing and that sort of thing, but there are also legal parameters in what can be released and what can be. And I want also, and then why is that relevant to the assignment we're doing? Well, it's relevant because um, getting like more than one side of an opinion, get one side of a story also helps show that you were doing your due diligence and getting everything you need, and it also helps protect you from a potential lawsuit. This is actually something that's actually been determined by the Supreme Court that as long as the reporter does their due diligence, they may make a mistake, that um, they are still they're showing that they are actually trying to do their best and they're not showing any kind of reckless disregard for the truth, not being lazy, that they can protect themselves. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about is it's actually in chapters 5 and 6. Okay, so and there's a thing called libel and there's a thing called slander, but we deal more with libel. So the big difference between libel and slander essentially is libel is definition by written words or communication defamation. Basically, we're accusing somebody of something and it's done in a reckless way and an untruthful way. Okay. Whereas slander is defamation by spoken words or gestures, which also can end up in a written word. That makes sense. Traditionally, the law has treated libel more harshly because the written word is more permanent. It can reach more people than the spoken word. So when you do things like, even when you do things like usually that's something to kind of geared toward maybe like one person who's done something controversial. We've seen it happen with certain people over the years, seen it happen with our president. And he's even done things and somehow managed to be successful at it only because I think these networks have caved in, but he's sued essentially the CBS for defamation because they didn't fully report a piece about Kamala Harris a couple of years ago and it left out some things. And instead of actually fighting the lawsuit, which they would have won because they had very weak grounds to do so, CBS caved and actually gave him the money. And then the parent company, sold itself to a pro-Trump outfit. So, um, but I mean, what typically happens is a lot of these cases, so many of them are actually like thrown out because it's really actually really hard to prove libel. And that's again involves defamation, defamatory to injure a plaintiff's reputation, identification, defamatory communications either explicitly or implicitly about the plaintiff, or defamatory communication has been distributed to at least one person or the plaintiff. Plaintiffs must present credible evidence. Okay. There's an injury again, like reputation doesn't necessarily be somebody like broken bones or something. And then there's also like negligence that's involved. Okay. So that is something you actually should know. And I want to make sure you did know before you actually left this class. Um, now why would this matter from a Rutgers point of view? Well, from a Rutgers point of view, um, what we're doing here, we have people. Why Rutgers wouldn't sue guys for defamation or something like that? But in case they got a little crazy and they did, like the Trump administration would, um, the they could claim that basically people are making false claims about housing, perhaps. Maybe that'd be one of the things they would do. Okay. Now back in the old days, if people did make such claims about housing, and let's say they were untrue, like they were saying it was like too dirty or that the lines are too long, stuff like that. Back in a long time ago, it was actually very easy to prove a libel case. The courts routinely ruled in favor of the big corporations and that sort of thing. So it was actually really difficult to be a reporter. And it was difficult because if you made a mistake, you could also be sued too, because that mistake would be considered some sort of reckless disregard for the truth. But then what happened was in 1964, there was a case called Times v. Sullivan. And what happened was it involved a law enforcement officer um, in the South who felt like he was essentially being falsely accused as a racist. And it was actually not in a story, it was in an advertisement in the New York Times. So he felt that like he was being falsely accused as being a racist. So what the Supreme Court normally would have done is they probably would have given that award to Sullivan, who was the law enforcement officer who claimed that he was not being accused of racist because of his treatment of Martin Luther King when he was in jail and that sort of thing. So anyway, the Supreme Court looked at it, and this was a very progressive Supreme Court. It was known as the Warren Court, led by Earl Warren, a Supreme Court justice appointed by President Dwight David Eisenhower. And they did things like Brown versus Board of Education, desegregated schools. Many progressive things happened during that time period, which was about 54 to 53 maybe to about 69. Anyway, so one of the things they realized was that, first of all, like reporters are humans, okay? Okay, so they're going to make mistakes, okay? But what they wanted to make sure was if they did make the mistake, that they had their due diligence, that they did not show a reckless disregard for the truth, that they actually did all the work they did to provide not just as close to the version of, well, as they get to the most obtainable version of the truth as possible. And the one way to do that is to actually get like multiple sources to a story, not just one, okay, but multiple sources to a story. I was going to show you another one, but I thought that the language was way too offensive. There was a man by the name of Aubrey Huff in a recent story who he made all sorts of anti-gay slurs. He's an ex-San Francisco Giant baseball player. And there's been all sorts of things that have been happening in San Francisco involving the Giants, and there were baseball players who were defied wearing a Pride Day hat, gay Pride Day hat. So he went off. And what needed in that story was if that story, even if they were it was well intentioned, if it just printed Aubrey Huff's point of view, which was horrific, that newspaper could be sued for libel because they basically essentially assaulted and injured a whole group of people by just printing his word. What they needed was, and what many of these stories did, was they had people respond. They had the baseball commissioner respond. They had people from the LGBTQ plus community respond to try to balance things out. So it wasn't just one giant press release diatribe against the gay community. Okay. That would be reckless disregard, not getting enough sources. So that's why you get more than one sources and you provide that sort of balance, to balance off what other bad things may be happening, okay? Disregard for the truth. Okay. So that's the big one right there, is a reckless disregard for the truth. Another one is involves intent. If there's malicious intent involved, and that does happen sometimes. Sometimes you get people who are stand on the wrong side of the aisle of things, and they actually like, or maybe not even the wrong side of the aisle of things. They actually write something, and they may make it up, they may not. They don't get the appropriate balance in the story, and they actually purposely put something in the newspaper that actually hurts somebody. Okay, and usually that does involve reckless disregard of the truth. Well, I mean that's something that's much less common. Um, so anyway, so this story right here, I was looking at this one right here. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump sued this one, but the New York Times has actually been good about not caving. And it says Trump cut $1 million mining deal. His sons still stand to profit. And it's all about essentially like how these Trump sons have done all sorts of things. Ahead of the deal, Trump administration went through sorts of approvals that basically helped out the sons to get profit from this deal. Who was involved in helping them get there around the same time? Cantor, blah, 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 controlled by Letnick. That was one of the guys who was in the Trump administration to help them out. Helped one of the lead investors raise money for this deal. Okay. You didn't like, as we're doing right here, you don't really see like, and it may be bullshit what they're saying here, but you don't really see like White House response, but you do have to get the other side's point of view. Okay. You don't see it until later, but at least you have that balance there to show that, yeah, you can believe whatever you want to believe. And there's a lot of people who believe everything what the Trump administration says. So it says the only special interest guiding the Trump administration's decision making is the best interest of the American people. That's like I call it non-denial denial. Securing and reshoring America's critical supply chains have been a top priority for President Trump, Secretary Letnick, blah, blah, blah. So what they do is they try to kind of bring it in and try to show that hey, we're not so bad. And they may be lying through their teeth, but that's up to the reader to decide like who's telling the truth. They do their due diligence in their reporting, they get the other side, they get the other point of view to balance things out, and they can point to a judge and say, hey, look, we got their point of view, we got their side. This is what they said. We gave them an opportunity to rebut it, to claim it was false, and the judge would probably throw it out. Again, like I said, there's actually some outlets out there that just cave too easily to the Trump administration. And so anyway, that's important to know that this is also another test. And basically, and the big thing is that you don't actually um, the big end game here is that when you don't get enough sources in a story, it's not necessarily like a libel you have to worry about. If you make a mistake in a story, it's not necessarily a libel you have to worry about. It's your credibility. Well, because libel is so hard to prove. You want to basically, you don't, you, there's plenty of reporters, unfortunately, have made mistakes in stories and still have a job. But that's the thing is like you risk losing your job and that sort of thing if you do make those sorts of mistakes. You don't do full reporting. You don't like make sure that you have accurate reporting and that sort of thing. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and I appreciate it. And remember what we got due. We got those two things that are due. And the next week got the major assignment, and we got the rewrite of the feature assignment, which I'm sending back to you as of now. All right. Thanks very much, and I'll be talking to you.